The Institute of Leadership and Management recognises great leadership as being multidimensional. We identify 5 dimensions: authenticity, vision, achievement, ownership and collaboration. We've broken down those 5 dimensions into 49 components, which enable us to organise our resources in such a way as to help individuals access the leadership development that is immediately relevant to them. This video introduces conversation, part of the dimension of authenticity. Why do we think conversation is so important for leaders? Well, hopefully I'll be able to talk about that quite a bit in the next few minutes. But authentic leaders really get conversation, how powerful it is, and so importantly about the importance of listening, because conversation is not just about talking. It's about how we participate in that conversation, as well as using our dimensions of leadership to convey the values of the Institute, because there are values as well as the dimensions and our components. We also use them as a content management system. So anybody who wants to hone in on a particular aspect of leadership can easily go to what they need, when they need it, quickly access the resources. So I've already identified that we see conversation as part of authenticity, the component of conversation, and then we've broken down conversation into more subcomponents, if you like, and each one of these has a spotlight. It's a digital leaflet. You can download and print them if you want them, where we look at aspects of conversation that we think are really important, and those 3 subcomponents. So the subcomponents, the spotlights today, are importance of listening, that I've already emphasised. Storytelling, we hear so much about storytelling, and this new thing that's known as conversational leadership that's sort of come into being in the last few years. Why is conversation such a big deal? I think it's because we use it so much in so many ways, and it has different purposes. We can use it for an aimless chat, and I'm a bit of a fan of the aimless chat, because actually I think a lot of that serves to build those important social bonds that people tell us in our research that is so important for work, your colleagues. And how else do you get to know colleagues without talking to them? And I'm not, when I talk about conversation, I'm talking about speaking here. I'm not excluding anybody. And of course, people with different abilities use conversation in different ways. So it could be chat boxes. It doesn't actually always have to be this sort of verbal conversation. So although that is what I'm talking about most of the time, it's not that I'm not mindful that sometimes people can't access verbal conversations and indeed listen to them or say them. How one speaks is very important in a conversation, whether one is having a very informal or very formal conversation, whether we're gearing ourselves up to persuade somebody to do something, or whether we're trying to put a different point of view. Loads of ways of having and conducting a conversation. And how do you have a difficult conversation? We all know they exist, but how happy are we, happy being the wrong word, I suppose, willing are we to engage in one? So if we're having a difficult conversation, are we being open and honest? Or are we just saying what we think needs to be said in order to keep the conversation going? Or maybe we're just trying to hide parts of ourselves. You give away so much in conversation because your voice conveys so many other messages about your level of belief in what you're talking about, your level of interest. You know, the voice, such an important part of conversation, and how we use it, of course, varies so much from the number we're talking to. I'm talking to a lot of people here today, and that's a different sort of conversation than one that one would have with somebody who was in the same room as you. But of course, at the moment, so few of us are having conversations with people in the same room, certainly not in a work context. So how we use our voice and how we talk is very much has to be adapted to the circumstances. I wanted to emphasize, as we have in the spotlights, that listening is so important to conversation. And I think Ralph Nichols, who's been hailed as the father of listening, and that grainy black and white photograph, actually understood, and he really highlighted for us, if you don't listen and you only talk, you are giving away far information about yourself than you're getting back. So those, as he said there, those who understand us better are the people who've been listening to us. And if we haven't been listening to them, they have a greater insight into our motivation, our thinking than we have into theirs. And I suppose lots of you will think, oh yeah, I know people like that, never listen. And they have no idea what I'm thinking or what my view on anything is because they're so busy telling me theirs. I chose this picture, particularly this photograph here today, because I know we're trying to convey that we're listening in very difficult circumstances. And the first rule of good listening is invariably, use the appropriate body language. I thought this guy's doing a great job. He's sort of leaning into his laptop. He's paying attention to what's being said. Okay, he's got the microphone and the headphones, but he's managing to convey to whoever he's pretending to speak to, because it's a stock photo, whoever, that actually he's listening. Other ways that you can convey that are by asking open questions, not ones that require a yes or a no, but the who, what, when, where, why sorts of questions. Why do you think that? And then following them up. People love being listened to, and that to me is one of the great things about coaching, that you've got somebody who's paying attention, who's listening, who's caring about your experience. And one way we let people know is by asking a follow-up question. So we're saying, oh yeah, you've told me that, well, tell me a bit more. And that great question, yeah, go on, or tell me more, or how was that? Conversation doesn't have to be non-stop. We can use pauses, allowing people time to regroup. I know this is something that a lot of people find really difficult, the pause that you feel compelled to fill with some words, but just get good at that pause that allows you to convey through pausing that you're really paying attention. Keep referring back. Let people know that you were listening 5-10 minutes ago, previous conversations. So you're letting them know that they have been heard. And of course, the better the questions that you ask, the more people realise that they've been understood. And as I said before about the power of your voice, people are conveying so much when they talk, how they're feeling, their level of emotion at the moment. And you can hear somebody say, the classic one is if you ask somebody how they are and they say they're fine, and they're not fine. The word was fine, but everything else is telling you that they're not fine. So what you can do there is say, well, you don't sound fine, or you don't look fine, and just gently challenge the words as they seem to contradict with what you're able to see. Storytelling, this seems to have been invented in the 21st century. How many people have we met who say, oh, I like to work with stories? My view on this is that we all work with stories all the time. We're always telling each other stories. I know any of you have seen Catherine Tate, some of her early sketch shows where she used a situation where two characters used to talk about the most mundane stories, as it were, and really entertained each other in so doing. And it's how you tell the story. And we've got a diagram here that essentially stories sort of follow a pattern. You set some context, and it's so tempting often to overdo the detail. It doesn't really matter what people's names were or where you were. It's the action that we want to talk about in a story, because it's the unusual or the absence of something that makes it a story. We weren't expecting that, or we were expecting it, and something else happened. And how the main characters respond to that unusual event becomes the story. That's what we're going to tell each other about. We were expecting a meeting to take place. It didn't because so-and-so said this, or somebody said that, or this had happened somewhere else. What were the people doing that contributed to that story? And how did you overcome whatever the difficulties were? And describing those difficulties, describing the challenges. And then what we like with stories, it seems, there's loads of work done on how many different plots there are, and the estimates vary, but I think one I've read, big piece of work that was done recently, that actually there aren't any more than 7 sorts of plots for a story. So you're going to something unexpected, you're going to deal with it, and then we're going to get to some sort of outcome. I found these 6 basic plots I think the BBC had identified, and if we, you go back to fairy stories, we'll see all of these. Somebody is poor and they become rich, somebody is rich and then they become poor, and that's very sad. Somebody becomes really famous and then falls from grace, and then, or you can go up and down and up again. You can see here that essentially it's this change in circumstances, this extreme new event or change that makes it a story. So when you're trying to tell somebody a story to get their attention, because you want to use conversation to intrigue them and to make them listen to you, just feel about the rhythms of this and what it is that you're trying to tell them, particularly if you're delivering a presentation, to start with the idea that you're going to take people on a journey with you. You're starting somewhere, introducing something that's interesting, showing that how you respond to it, and what happens at the end, the denouement. How does the story end? And so if you think about presentations maybe that you've attended, it's the talking that gets the audience listening to you, not the facts on the screen, not those very dense PowerPoint presentations with loads of numbers and loads of text. People want to listen to your story, to how you're talking them through the story of your presentation. But again, we all know people who tell great stories. We all know people who are not really terribly good at stories. And it's up to all of us, to get a bit better, because actually storytelling is a lovely thing to do for people. It's a great gift to entertain them and bring them into your world. Conversational leadership, as I said a few moments ago, is something that's really sort of not been around very long. It's definitely a 21st century thing. I got this definition here from Tal Schnall, who's worked in the field of customer service, actually. And he says, it was really an observation, isn't it, that conversational leadership takes place where leaders see that their organizations are webs of conversation and consider conversation as a core process for effective change. Those of you who are familiar with or deliver training will know about the 70-20-10 model, which talks about 70% of learning is informal and 20% is sort of on the job formal interaction, and only 10% that we get from lectures and books. That really isn't how you go about teaching people. That's an observation of how learning takes place. And I think that's really, conversational leadership hasn't been invented. It's somebody's decided to observe it in action and actually see it's conversation that makes organizations work. It's conversation that turns a strategy into something that's operational. It might be conveyed via PowerPoints and spreadsheets, but actually it's the sense and the understanding that individuals have that they arrive at through conversation that enables these things to happen. And just as I was saying, the culture of an organization is created through the stories we tell each other about that organization, about the people who worked there, the people who have left, things that happen in other teams and in other departments. And that creates what it's like to work somewhere. And we create that by talking to each other about it. In 2014, Jim McCann actually published a book where he used his experience of conversation as a means of enacting a leadership strategy, and this book became really successful. So think so much more about the conversations that you're having in organizations. Think how powerful they are, how they get repeated, how they get taken out of context often, and how when you're at home and you're using conversation differently, because it's not the same as being in the same room as people, but actually try always to use your voice, if you can, to use video conferencing. Even if you're sending somebody a detailed spreadsheet, and that has to be sent, you can't really convey that orally. Send them a voicemail as well that says which bits you'd like them particularly to look at, which bits you're struggling with. So you're giving that conversational commentary to sort of the everyday tasks that you're trying to do when you're not sitting next to people and you can't point to the bit of the spreadsheet or the PowerPoint slide that you really want them to take particular notice of.